Welcome, Rebecca, to Redesigning Life. I am so excited to have you on, and for reasons you have no idea about, but I'm going to tell you, obviously. But for listeners who are just tuning in, they may already know you because you are an attorney by trade, but you are an expert in narcissism and negotiating with a narcissist. So, first of all, thank you for being on the podcast. I have so many questions for you, but I'm going to tell you a funny story. Well, it's kind of funny, but not funny. So when your people reached out to be on the podcast, it was like this strange feeling that came over my body because I know your face so well only because I was in a relationship with a potential narcissist and I would watch your videos nonstop. So when I saw, your name and your face, it was like this, I got like swept back into that time in my life, and it's been years, but I'm sure people feel that way about you. Like they just have to ingest as much information as possible to kind of unravel their lives. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm glad that you are no longer in that relationship.
You and
So
me both,
that's
sister.
good. Yeah. And it is true. It's funny because I can only imagine what it's like for, real celebrities, I'll call it, because when people do recognize me, which happens actually fairly a lot, I will say that, the reaction is very emotional. And, I really try to hold space for them and honor them because, I'll see them in airports or at Costco or on the Strand down here or, crazy places. And they're like, can I hug you? I'm going to start crying. And it is because they feel like they know me or that I've carried them through a really difficult time in their lives. So
Yes, I feel
thank
like you were my
you.
best friend at the time. There, I just kept listening to your information and watching your videos because I felt so lost and I felt so embarrassed. And I'm sure you get that a lot, but embarrassed because it's like, how can somebody, and I mean, I think I'm smart, but how can I, like, I'm a smart girl. Like, how did I get stuck in this gaslighting trauma bond?
You know what, though? I ended up in it. And this was after I had built one of the top family law practices in Florida. And then I ended up with a narcissistic business partner. And so, that's why I always tell my story. And I always say they don't attach themselves to you because you have so little value. They attach themselves to you because you have so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and so I always tell people exactly what happened to me. And, because I want people to get rid of that shame and blame and all of that. Because think about it, it's why would a narcissist want to devalue the clearance rack
Right.
special? They want to devalue something that has value.
Yeah. So, yeah, so for people just listening, you're an attorney, and I'm sure you have to deal with narcissists all the time, but I do feel like there's this trend that everybody calls everyone a narcissist these days.
Yeah,
So, how I feel like everyone is on the spectrum, but
definitely true.
yes, everyone's on the spectrum. And then I want to ask you about something else later on about when you start thinking you yourself are a narcissist. But so if everyone's on the spectrum, then are we all narcissists?
Well, no, we're not all narcissists, but we all have narcissistic traits or I mean, I would say that there's narcissistic personality disorder all the way at the end of the spectrum. That's the person who has the disorder, and it is a legitimate personality disorder that is recognized by the DSM-5, which is what psychologists, mental health people, that's what they use to diagnose, clinicians use to diagnose. So if you take, I always say that's one end of the spectrum, and if you want to go to the other end of the spectrum, you have Jesus or Dalai Lama or whoever it is that you want to say is on the other side, right?
Yeah.
Then the rest of us fall somewhere in the middle or somewhere on the other along the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And if you feel sick or you're feeling particularly tired or selfish that day, you might be a little further toward the end of the spectrum. So we all kind of have traits and tendencies toward it. It's when you're sort of creeping toward the end of that spectrum that you're going to have more shame, more pain, more. It's that lack of empathy. It's that complete shame. It's that most pain. It's that person who feels totally and completely empty inside, that person who has to get all of their sense of value from external sources because they feel completely small inside. And so they just can't see anything but themselves. And that's why they don't have any sense of empathy. It's like having the worst possible toothache or something. And so when you have a really bad toothache, all you can see is yourself.
Right.
You can't see anybody else. And so there's this black hole inside of them, and it can never be filled. And so they constantly try to fill it with what is called narcissistic supply. I like to tier it between diamond level supply and coal level supply, which is external. Diamond level supply is image, reputation, anything tied to that. So it could be the celebrity friends, it could be
Social media following.
Social media following, of course, absolutely. It could be the trappings of, what your house looks like, or the what you're wearing, or anything like that, right? Your friends, who you're with, anything that is tied to image or reputation. It could be your new girlfriend, the new thing, whatever. So, but then there's what I call the coal level supply, which is manipulation, putting people down to make themselves feel better, rage. It could be the smearing of you, bringing the army together, that the flying monkeys. And it could be also in a negotiation why they constantly move goalposts, because they enjoy the process of seeing you squirm. They enjoy that process of making you miserable. And that's that dark underbelly of narcissistic supply, is what I call that, because it's that side that they don't necessarily want people to see, because they want everybody to think that they're so perfect and wonderful, right?
I know. Now, okay, so here's a thing. I've done episodes on narcissism before, and I used all the terms: flying monkeys, trauma bonds, gaslighting, and I hate that I even know what these terms mean. I wish I didn't, but I think a lot of people don't. And so if somebody is stuck in a relationship, whether it be with a partner, a romantic partner, a family member, this happens to a lot of the time, where a mother or father is a narcissist, a boss, coworker. Two questions. Does the person know that they're a narcissist? Do they know that they're manipulating you? And then secondly, how do you stop yourself from believing their BS? Because that I think was hard for me, because of the cognitive dissonance of, they'd be so nice and then they'd be so calculating and manipulative. And I would get confused, like, well, which one's the real you? Is the real you the manipulation, or is the real you the nice saint-like person? So how does somebody not fall for the manipulation when they're stuck in the middle of it, when they can't get out, if it is a boss or your mother?
They do inherently know that there's something amiss within inside of them. They do inherently know that. And there's always something that they're trying to cover up. They know that they're wearing this mask. They know that it's this masquerade. And that's why they know that they're acting in a certain way to manipulate you, but it's not always necessarily conscious how they behave. but they do know that they're manipulating you. They do know that there's hidden secrets that they have. They do know that there's things that they're not telling you, that there's this withhold going on, and that they're just trying to lure you in until they can get to a certain place so that they don't have to constantly be doing this, because they're just trying to get to a place where they can start taking, because they really don't want to have to keep love bombing. So they do inherently know that. But is it always sort of conscious? I don't know. But you also sort of know too. I think I know for sure I knew. I knew that there were things that weren't adding up. I
Right.
definitely saw the signs.
Yes.
But, you know, the thing is that they do choose people who are not necessarily, and I'm going to just say this with all love and all no judgment, because everybody's got their traumas, okay? Everybody's got their big T's and their little T's of trauma. And I say this with so much love and so no judgment. I've done so much work on myself, you know? And so I'm just going to say they know how to look for the open places, the vulnerabilities. They know where the doors are, and they go in. So if there's a spot where this person is going to not have boundaries and love on them and allow them to do certain things, like lend them money and not necessarily have to pay them back, or give, and they'll be allowed to take in certain ways.
Yeah.
I know for me, I had a business partner where I ended up doing a lot of the work, and I ended up being, you know, I had already had a brand to a certain extent, and this person came in with certain promises that introductions were going to be able to be made, and by putting her name on things, that she would be able to bring certain things, and these things never ended up materializing. And then she was going to work on certain aspects, and then things ended up happening in her life. So I ended up doing a lot of the work, and then this person ended up taking credit for it. And, you know, and so they know that how they can sort of attach themselves to
But
people.
did this person attach themselves to you after you've already done this work?
No.
So this was before.
No. Yes. And so, but what happens is, you know, you get into these relationships, and then you say, you know, well, we're going to divide up these tasks. Well, okay, this is going to be your part. Well, then things happen. Well, I had this family emergency. Well, then you end up being the empath. Well, I don't want to hold you to account because I know you've got this family emergency. Okay, I'll let you slide because I don't want to be the bad person. I want to be the good person. Of course, I'm empathetic to it, you know. And so you end up having what I call leaky boundaries.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be the bad person.
Right.
And they look for people like that.
Do narcissists always attach themselves to empaths?
Yes. I
Always.
mean, it's that symbiotic relationship, because they are going to look for that kind of a person. And so I know for me, as an attorney, I was always to the mat. You know, I would go to the mat for a person as an attorney. And that's what made me a very good attorney, because I would fight and be a very, very good advocate for my clients. But in a business partnership, I was much more, you know, what I would call codependent in a lot of ways, because I was I'll be, as a friend and even as a wife or whatever, I'm always very loyal, very helpful, very, okay, I'll do it. I'll help you. I'll be there. I'll be kind, and so I ended up not in a good place
Yeah.
for that. And
You,
so I had to be very, I ended up feeling very used and abused in that relationship. I would never let that happen again.
yeah,
Let me just say that now.
same.
My eyes are very, very open
It took me
now.
years, though, years of
Yeah,
healing myself and my childhood wounds and all of the codependency issues that I had in
totally.
order to not allow myself to get into a relationship like that again. And I did see a pattern of I would go, I would fall for one after the other. It was like I was a magnet for it. And I think it
Totally.
took me taking time for myself and healing myself in order to now realize that I'm no longer attracted to, or nor are narcissists, I think, attracted to me. But you talked about this in your podcast. It was one of your recent podcasts about the man who was caught in a hotel room with a woman who was his coworker, and he was in there for hours, and the wife had seen them, and he said, you're overreacting. And I have to tell you, it sounds like crazy. Like, of course, girl, like, wake up. But I've been in that situation. There was a situation once that the person who I was dating told a mutual friend of ours that we were in my backyard and we got in a huge fight and I was screaming. And Rebecca, I'm telling you, I thought I was going crazy because I didn't remember it happening that way. But I like to self-reflect. So I remember one night, like that night, I was laying in bed, like, did it happen that way? Am I maybe going crazy? And then I realized I had a Ring camera in my backyard and I watched the footage and none of that happened. None of it. So I had to show that footage to our friends to let them know, like, I'm not crazy. This never happened. But thank God I had that footage. But I can see how people get like caught up in the cognitive dissonance, the gaslighting, the you're crazy, you're overreacting, you're acting absurd, and you start believing, it. And I can see how people feel like they're going crazy when they're in these relationships. And how do you help people unravel themselves from this? What did you call it? Emotional warfare, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, there's a couple of different ways. One is the first thing that I explain to people is what actually formed a narcissist in the first place. I think that's really so helpful for people to understand. And that is that they were formed as a result of trauma. And this was actually very, very eye opening for me. And that is that they were formed as a result of trauma to their brain at some point during childhood. And the way it was explained to me in the research is that when we are in stress as human beings, our bodies go into fight or flight, which is normal. And so our bodies emit hormones, which are adrenaline and cortisol, which we all know, we're all aware of. But what happens to children when this happens on a regular and continuous basis, because of whatever stressful things are going on in their lives as children, whether it's abuse or neglect or witnessing abuse or divorce or whatever it is, but it's regular and it's continuous, then the cortisol aspect, it's actually the cortisol aspect, which is that stress hormone, can actually cause arrested development in the limbic system part of the brain, which is that emotional center part of the brain, which is in the middle part of the brain. So while the cortex part of the brain, the outer part of the brain, which is the thinking and judgment part of the brain, can continue to develop normally, it's that limbic system part of the brain that actually experiences arrested development. So that actually is now called narcissistic injury. So what happens is when they become triggered, then which can happen from anything that's verbal or nonverbal, and it's not rational and it's not reasonable. Then they turn on a dime. It's called splitting. And so then now that becomes triggered, and it literally shuts the cortex down. It literally shuts down. And so now you're only dealing with that limbic system part of the brain, and they literally become blind. It's called narcissistic blindness. And they literally become blind to the collateral damage that they can cause to others when they are in this state. And when they're in this state, then if you look at the anatomy of the brain, it's so close to the memory part of the brain and the hippocampus and all of that. They literally don't necessarily remember what they're doing, and they don't know about the damage that they're causing. And even more frightening to me, frankly, is that they will self-sabotage to hurt others.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by self-sabotage?
They will, and I saw this as a litigator, but I didn't understand this until now. They will harm themselves in order to go after another person. So in other words, if they want to take you down, they will take themselves down to take you down.
In what, like getting into a car accident or
heart phase, for example?
Yeah.
What I would see as a divorce attorney is a guy who would say, I will burn my business to the ground so I don't have to pay you alimony.
Yeah.
I will do whatever it takes so that you don't get this. I would have a guy who would say, I'd rather pay you than her. So I would have a guy who was like paying me fees of $200,000 over the course of 5 years or whatever it is, because he wanted to scorch the earth with litigation. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
You said this earlier, and I think it's absolutely true, because if I look back at the relationships that I've had with these people, I knew in my gut and in my heart something was off, and I couldn't put my finger on it, and I had no proof. Something felt off. And I think a lot of people listening to this can, if they're in the situation, can probably really, if they dug deep enough, can realize that they felt like something's off too. But when you explain how a narcissist is born, I think a lot of people are listening, and if they're in that relationship, they say, okay, well then I could fix them. But you can't.
No, you can't. And so that's why I say the very first thing, once you understand this, you go, okay, just start to see them as a toddler having a tantrum on the floor, because that's what
But
they
you
are.
feel bad for a toddler. I've had a toddler.
Yeah. So it's hard enough to change yourself.
Yeah.
I think it's hard enough to change yourself. Like I've been on this, journey of self-improvement for 20 years myself, all the way back to reading Celestine Prophecy and all sorts of things, 20 years ago, whatever it was, right? 25, probably 30 years ago now, and I can tell you that it's hard enough to change yourself. Our brain is not wired for success. Our brain is wired for survival. So, you gotta I always say, I can never leave my thoughts unsupervised. I've always got to be listening to something good or whatever. Input's got to be good, because it's really hard to change your thoughts. It's really hard to rewire your neuronal pathways, right? You're not changing somebody who does not see a problem with their ways.
Yeah.
They don't see an error in their ways. They're not self-aware. And so you have to take care of yourself. So I would say put an invisible shield down around you. The very first steps, I say step 1, don't run. Step 2, make a U-turn. Step 3, break free.
Wait, what do you mean step 1, don't run?
Step 1, don't run is you put that invisible shield down around you. You start to say to yourself, the very first step, the very first thing that you can do, because you're so used to retreating, You're so used to playing defense. And if you're going to make a 180 and start playing offense, the first thing you got to do is start to say, what baby step can I do today that's going to stop that retreat and stop the conditioning? And that is one invisible shield down around you, and start to say, today, the first thing I'm going to do is say, I am demanding respect. I don't care who you are, if it's your mom, your brother, your sister, your boss, your neighbor. Whatever interaction we're having, it's going to be with respect. So I like to give people just a few phrases, some catchphrases to use that are helpful. I have free phrases at disarmthenarc.com if you want them. And so I say, you can say things like, I can see that you're upset. We can continue this conversation later when you've calmed down.
No, Rebecca, I want to continue. What if they say that? No, I want to have this conversation now.
Okay, well, this approach is not working for me.
Well, too bad.
Well, then I'm not going to continue.
But it's like that's narcissists don't take no for an answer. If they're in a rage,
well, then you can just walk away.
Then you walk away.
You just walk away.
Yeah.
Thank you for the feedback, but I'll talk to you. I'll talk to
you. A
later.
Narcissist is gonna love that. Thank you for the feedback. Okay, sure.
Yeah. I mean, what else are you gonna say? Like, right? Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, it's called gray rocking, right? A gray rock.
Right. That's it. That's it. I'm done here.
One thing I did learn is that, even if you respond with rage, whether you respond with anything, any response, they get supply. They get a high off of turning you either in any reaction.
Right. So, I always tell people, don't respond with, a higher, louder voice. Don't go lower, if anything, go lower. And then never use absolutes, never use always or never or anything like that. Like if they're late, 87% of the time, which is a lot, just say you've been late 87% of the time, use your exact numbers, your exact figures, because that will help you. Never use profanity, never call them names, because they're always going to seize on whatever they can seize on. So be very, very specific. Use specifics, use facts, stick to facts, because whatever they can, they're going to be like, oh, you just raised your voice, you just interrupted me, you just used that bad word, you just called me a name. So you have to be really, really careful when you are arguing with them or when you're having a conversation with them. The other thing I tell people is to, I say, making a plan stand, right? So when you're going to have a conversation with them, have an agenda and a scope and a time limit ahead of time. Make sure they know about it ahead of time. So, we're going to meet for an hour, and this is going to be the agenda, and this is going to be the topic, and this is going to be the place. And then when they try to go off topic, no, sorry, we're talking about this thing, because they're going to try to talk about 15 different things, something from 10 years ago or something from whatever. No, we're talking about this, and we're going to stick to the facts.
Yeah.
And when you hit the time limit, go, oh my God, this has been so wonderful. I love talking to you. This is my favorite thing ever. But sorry, gotta go.
But what happens if you're married to somebody? What if you're married to somebody like that? And when your clients come to you, and I assume a lot of people find you on social media, which, by the way, for anyone listening, I will have Rebecca's contact information in the show notes, her Instagram and her website, and her podcast too.
Yeah, my YouTube is, RebeccaZung.tv is my YouTube.
Yes, I'll put it all in there. But if people are coming to you, do you always recommend that somebody get out of a relationship with somebody who can potentially be a narcissist?
Yes, if they can. I do recognize that, I really try to be judgment-free for people, meet them where they are. I know that sometimes people are in financial situations, or they've got children, or, so I try not to make people feel bad or whatever, but if they can, definitely.
Yeah.
You should. Yes, of course.
Something that happened to me, and I just got reminded because a friend of mine is going through a breakup, and in all of the research that they are doing and all of the YouTube videos, it's like they're going through the same thing I went through years ago. They started asking themselves if they were a narcissist, and they panicked. And I remember one night I was filming and I was out of town, and I was listening to some video, and Rebecca, it was like I started having a panic attack. Like, maybe I'm the problem. I am the problem. Maybe they're not the one. And it was this like sad, I was crying, and I was reaching out to my therapist, and it must be pretty typical of people sometimes, if they're in a relationship, to start looking at a mirror and wondering if they're the problem. And does that happen a lot to your clients?
Yes, definitely, especially because what the narcissist does is something called DARVO, which is deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender, which is they deny any wrongdoing, and then they attack the victim, and then they reverse it on them, and they start smearing it to everybody, and then they start making so much noise about it that they make the victim seem like they're the offender. And so it is so triggering, and it makes the person seem like their behavior was so horrible. And what they do is they use your reaction
Yes.
to their behavior
Yes.
as what is the offending behavior.
Right. They will trigger you
so-
to act like a crazy person. Then they will
Exactly.
record that craziness and say, look at how this person acts. Look at them. This is what I have to
Correct.
put up
And
with.
which brings me to something that I also wanted to talk about, which is what's going on in the brain of the victim. And that is it's a dopamine cortisol effect and it actually shrinks the hippocampus of the victim, and so it actually affects your memory, it clouds your brain. It really is CPTSD. And this is why I have a high conflict negotiation certification program, which I actually just started in July of last year. So it's actually coming up on a year now, but I've certified about 200 coaches so far, and I have more coming in every day, which is so awesome. I love it. And then I have Breaking Free Power coaching on the back end, so my coaches coach people on the back end, and it's such a unique coaching program because we teach people how to deal with the drama, trauma, and chaos, and we teach people how to negotiate, and it's just really, really empowering because most people don't understand the mind of a person when they're coming in to negotiate and what they're dealing with. It's just so unique, this clouded mind.
Yes.
And judges or mediators or people, they just go, hey, you guys just need to work it out. And they don't understand that this person is so fragile and so triggered, and so they're barely eating, they're probably barely sleeping, they're probably barely functioning and barely holding it together, and let alone, focusing on what it is they need to be negotiating or what dealing with, right? And it can cause autoimmune issues. It can cause their hair to fall out, skin issues, skin problems. I mean, all sorts of issues. And so
The person that a friend of mine that's going through the breakup is sick, like sick. And they think it has nothing to do with this relationship, and it has everything to do with a relationship.
Yes. So what happens is that dopamine hit initially when that love bomb, because it's not a regular relationship when you first go in. You don't just, meet, it's so nice. It's like this massive dopamine hit because that high is so high. And then the lows are so low.
Right.
The cortisol is just, that stress is so stressful. And then they come back with the massive high again.
Right.
And so what's going on in your body is just so, it's such a toxic mix. It's really, really not good. And so that dopamine hit, there's a study out of Stanford University that was done by Robert Sapolsky on monkeys. And it was actually where these monkeys were, I think I think it was something similar to like a slot machine or something like that, where if they hit something, some kind of game or something, but they got the thing every single time, and the reward came up regularly where they expected it, then nothing happened in their brain. They measured the dopamine levels in their brain. Then nothing really happened. I mean, it was like a regular measurement. It was like even, right? But when it was variable, sort of like when you see a slot machine and you don't know what's going to come up, right? Yep. It's variable. What happened in the monkeys' brains is that the dopamine levels rose to the level of cocaine. Like, oh my God, is it going to come this time? Is it going to come this time? Is it going to come this time? So then the monkeys would get this reward. They would get this reward if they performed. And so it's the same thing that happens with narcissists. And it's the same thing, by the way, that keeps us addicted to video games on the phone.
Yes.
Like Angry Birds or whatever, right? And that's what happens with narcissists. It's this hot, cold. And so that's what actually causes the trauma bond.
You talked about the love bombing. How long does love bombing, and a lot of people, like, there is a difference between love bombing and a very healthy start of a relationship where you're just crazy about each other.
Sure.
So how do you tell the difference?
Well, because it doesn't necessarily add up. It's almost too good to be true. Right. This person is just everything a lie, everything, and it's too fast.
Yeah.
It's usually too fast.
Yes.
Like this person wants to, let's get married in Vegas in 2 weeks, or let's move in together, or let's meet your family, or let's become business partners immediately. And then when you try to slow down, it's usually when you try to slow down that the person is like, why should we slow down? Everything is great. Yeah. We were meant to be together. We were soulmates. And they're batting it away, and you're seeing red flags.
Yes.
You are seeing red flags. Yes. And you yourself are starting to rationalize the red flags.
Yes.
And if you find yourself doing that, don't do that.
Don't. Anybody who's listening, just trust us. Don't do that. If whatever whatever red flags you're ignoring in the beginning come to haunt you at the end. I was on a date with somebody a few years ago, and it was like our 2 weeks into dating, and he had said he loved me, and I'm like, okay, I'm out. That's it. But when you were talking about flying monkeys and smear campaigns, most experts in this field, including you, I think, say to ignore the smear campaign. But it's so hard, Rebecca, when you're being smeared, when people are saying horrible lies about you, to just ignore it, especially if it's affecting your inner circle, if maybe coworkers. How do you handle it when you feel as if your life is falling apart and they're the culprit?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I always say I always wear jade because I'm half Chinese, but never jade. Never justify, argue, defend, or explain. Because the more you get down into the mud with them, then they go fishing, they go bait, and now you're in it. Now, they pulled in, sucked in, dragged in, because that's what they want. And the people who are your true people are going to know the truth. And the cream does really always rise to the top. If you are really good, you have integrity, you are excellent at what you do, it will always come out. But you do definitely want to make sure that you cover your bases. So always document everything. I mean, especially when you're dealing with a narcissist. So, I mean, for sure, when you have a conversation with them, follow up with, this is to confirm the conversation that we just had. Here was what was said.
Yeah.
Or a conversation with anybody around them, anybody in their circle. I mean, you definitely want to keep track of anything, because all the smallest things end up being great things. I always say, thank you for the gift, because every time they ask for a change in a schedule, or they don't show up when they're supposed to, or they inadvertently left you off an email chain, or whatever, just all those things add up to a something. They add up to a something down the road. And so you just want to keep track. If it's at work, and they're kind of smearing you in terms of care, or something, this is what a covert narcissist might do. Oh, I'm so worried about Frank, and him coming in late a lot lately. I'm just so concerned. I always call the covert narcissist the pearl grabbers. Just concerned.
It's so true. It's so true. I think the covert narcissists are the scariest, because they're so good at hiding. But back to that story I was telling you, if I didn't have that footage of what really happened in my backyard, I wouldn't have been able to show the truth. And I'm glad that I have that. But you're telling me I shouldn't even have proven myself to be innocent?
Well, it just depends on what you're trying to prove it to. I mean, how important is it to you? Like, do you need to prove it in a court of law? Do you need to prove it to a boss? Do you need to prove it to,
Or is it was just a friend? But yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, otherwise, doesn't matter.
Yes, I think reputation does matter. Don't you think?
Well, if it matters to a friend, sure. If it matters to somebody like that, absolutely. But other than that, it really doesn't matter, because people who are your friends are really going to know.
Yeah.
And does it matter to yourself, where you can go, oh my God, I knew that was the case, right? Okay, that's really helpful for you.
Yeah.
But I mean, the very definition of gaslighting came from the movie Gaslight, or it was originally a play and then it became a movie, where the husband was actually trying to make the wife think that she was crazy, and what he was doing was blowing out gaslights, and she would say, wasn't that just lit? And he'd say, no, it wasn't. And she was like, I swear that was just lit. No. And that's where the word came from. And so anytime you're questioning your reality, you're questioning, did I feel that? Did I say that? Then that's what gaslighting is. Yes. And so they're invalidating your senses in some way. So if they make a joke at your expense and you say, hey, that really hurt my feelings.
Oh, you're being so sensitive.
It was a joke.
It was just a joke.
Well, that's invalidating you. It's invalidating your feelings.
Yeah.
It's invalidating your sense in some way. So all of that is gaslighting.
How do you normally work with clients these days? I know you do have workshops that you offer online, which again, I'll link to, but how do people mostly find you? Or is it usually because they're going through a really bad romantic relationship, or is it a family member? What is it usually?
Well, it is a divorce, because, I teach people how to negotiate with narcissists. And so the way I teach it is through my SLAY method, which is strategy, leverage, anticipate, and you. So you have to build a strategy which creates a vision of what you actually want and how to get where you want, and then take the action steps, which includes creating leverage. And so I talked about that diamond versus coal supply.
Yeah.
And so they will protect diamond level supply no matter what. And the myth is people think that they just want to win, but that's only taking into account diamond level supply. What they actually really want is both diamond and coal level supply. So what you have to do is build leverage such that you're threatening a source of supply that's more important for them to protect than the supply that they're getting from manipulating you. So you have to take what I call the gifts in documentation, which are all the summaries and all of the things that said, oh, hey, I asked for a change in the schedule 15,000 times, or I didn't pay you on time, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that, or I lied, or all the things that they do anyway, and put it together in a form of summary or whatever it is, and then threaten a source of supply that's more important for them to protect. And then you can put it in a format where you're presenting it to them, right, in the form of, hey, here's option A, which is what I want, or option B, which is going to be the hammer is going to get dropped on your head. And, that's what works. And then A is anticipate. Anticipate means you're anticipating the type of narcissist that you're dealing with, whether it's covert, grandiose, malignant, and staying 2 steps ahead of them, or it's also anticipating that they're going to bait you, they're going to try to trigger you. I give a narc toolbox of all different types of tools for people to deal with. And why is that it's your mindset and staying 100% in your mindset of winning, and staying offensive in your approach.
Rebecca, thank you so much. It is wild to be talking to you. I'm glad that I've actually been able to have a face-to-face time with you under these circumstances rather than years ago when I was just crying watching your videos.
Me too. Well, I feel like maybe it was manifested then.
100%. And so why don't you tell people a little bit about where to find you, your website, if they're listening, if they're driving, and your books. You have books, a podcast, your YouTube, Instagram.
Yeah, so my book is Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win, which it's a USA Today bestseller. People can buy it anywhere books are sold, Amazon, of course, but anywhere books are sold. My YouTube is RebeccaZung.tv. They can also get a free Crush My Negotiation prep playbook at winmynegotiation.com if they want. And Instagram is my name at Rebecca Zung.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being here. I'm sure this is helping so many people. I know you've helped me. I know you've helped friends of mine, so I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.